receptive patrons, regular visitors, and new guests of the library. I am the recorder, and before we continue with today's tale, allow me to ask you to like, share, and ensure you're subscribed to Gryphon's Library. Don't forget to leave a comment as well. If you wish to further support the library, consider joining us at Gryphon'sLibrary.locals.com. Other means of support are detailed in the channel's description page. Now, on to our tale. Continued from the Cathian and the Brothers, as well as the Sarge's Tale playlists. Sitting behind his desk aboard the Council for Inter-Sovereign Affairs diplomatic station, Peacemaker, Raz Zalon, hero of the realms and appointed arbitrator, was relieved that the dispute that he had been sent to resolve was now a settled matter. Looking over the treaty that both parties, Deeplock and Farmhold, had signed only a few hours before, Raz was again thankful that both leaders were not equally obstinate in the creation of this treaty. Deeplock had been from the beginning, denying the authority of Kaisa to intervene in the escalating conflict between the two powers. Both being non-members of Kaisa and located in the lawless lands of Solaris, he had a superficial point. But as Farmhold conceded to and agreed with Kaisa's logic in the matter, Deeplock was forced to engage with the talks. The fact that it was revealed that the impressive array of defenses Farmhold had constructed were potent enough not only to effect direct bombardment of any of Deeplock's lands or cities, as well as those weapons posing a threat to several Kaisa member states if they were to be captured, did a great deal to push Deeplock into cooperation, however begrudgingly. Over the next 6 days of talks, the pattern was much the same. Deeplock would object and argue a provision or proposition before them, and then Farmhold would cede ground in such a way as to make Deeplock's continued objections either null and void, or so unreasonable as to rob them of any potential support. From the size and placement of the buffer zone between the two's effective areas of operation and control, to the rights of trade and travel across their territories, Farmhold would let Deeplock object, and those satisfy those objections with concessions that were, all in all, rather minor, but significant enough to forestall any further objections on the point in dispute. Truly, if not for Farmhold's cooperation and willingness to concede points of contest in the name of peace, Raz was sure that they would not only still be arguing, but most likely still contesting the most basics of points and facts. However, Raz was not completely pleased. Something was off. He couldn't place his finger on it, but something about Deeplock's demeanor during the signing ceremony and the small reception held afterwards had set Raz on edge. While they had been all smiles and seemingly pleased with the details of the talks and the resultant treaty, it was clear also that they were very eager to depart, and Raz was sure there was an undercurrent of something. Raz was not sure exactly what, but it was clear that they were almost nervous about something. Both parties had departed almost an hour ago, and that sense of unease had not subsided. If anything, it had grown. In a clear sky, above the billowing mists of the foglands that were their home, Cathian and his brothers, accompanied by Elisei and Sonliak, were discussing the implications and impact of the treaty they had just signed. While all were in agreement that peace ensured by the treaty was to Farmhold and its people's benefits, not everyone felt that the list of concessions made to obtain the peace were as wise as others might think. reports from LSA's contacts indicated that Deep Block had been running on a wartime economy for the preparation for this conflict that the treaty just preempted, and was doubtful they would so easily put aside their goals and ambitions. Sonliak, as well as Jestik and Lassen, agreed with the elf noblesse, but felt that the threat of Kaisa would be more than enough to ensure that Deep Block held its end of the bargain. All discussions halted, however, as an emergency signal from Farmhold was registered by Cathian's transport. Farmhold was under attack, and while the message was strangely distorted, it was undeniably from Chanlos, who was in charge of security and general operations in the absence of Cathian or his brothers. Farmhold under attack. Numerous aggressors across most quarters and sectors. Full lockdown initiated. The message was on a repeating loop, despite the fact that it should have had a signal strength sufficient to reach nearly anywhere on Jam'mR. They were the only now barely receiving it. As the rest began to discuss what it could mean and who could be attacking them, Cathian hopped into the pilot seat and began preparing to enact the needed overrides to allow them to land and begin to make sense of what was happening. Even as the long-range sensors made clear that there were firefights across the city occurring, intense but seemingly localized or contained. Only the central sector seemed relatively free of combat, but even in that area, pockets of weapon discharges and other high-energy events were being detected. Strap in. We're going in hard and fast and need to be ready as soon as the doors open. Whoever is behind us is going to pay, but we must secure our home first. The rest voiced their agreement, and all began to check their weapons, with LSA producing a fine and obviously magical rapier and hand bolts launcher from seemingly nowhere. A curse a few moments later from Cathian stopped them in their tracks, and as Jestik asked what the matter was, Cathian's response brought a chill to everybody's blood. The transport carrying Deep Block's designation just sent out an SOS. They're under attack too. What do you mean you can't tell me what kind of discharges you are detecting? Rassilon asked the officer in charge of the Peacemaker's long-range sensor stations. Sorry, sir, but Farmhold has erected their shields, and they are distorting the scans. All we know for sure that it is consistent with either large-scale combat or many smaller, intense combats across the city. The officer, a dwarf, replied, We also just picked up an SOS from Deep Block's transport, as well as several of the villages and hamlets within their lands. This alarmed Rassilon more than the reports of Farmhold erupting into violence. Had both parties just gone ahead and began hostilities despite the treaty they just signed? No, that didn't make sense. But before he could mull on it further, alarms rang out across the Peacemaker. Hostile forces were on board and wreaking havoc on the station. Wait, they were under attack? On a Kaisa station? Tell me where those attackers are, now, best guess, Raz demanded, and as the officer scrambled to comply, Raz summoned his armor and sword. He'd brought sky cities and starships to ruination in his rise to his current position, and he'll be damned by Her Majesty Genevieve herself before he surrenders his station without a fight. A moment later, the dwarf shouted over the blaring alarm. The main conference room, as well as the vault, seemingly spreading out from there. Can't be sure though. Inconsistent signals and readings. Orders security to surround and contain. Contact Kaisa and the hunters for reinforcements. I am going to the conference room first. Raz spoke as his form began to fade, only staying present long enough to see that his orders were being carried out. For most, including many of the gods, Teleportation within the station was impossible thanks to the fine layers of NLR runes carved into the structure and in internal spaces. Raz, however, was not so hindered, as he was the one who scribed these runes, and thus was the only one with the ability to bypass them. Materializing high above the tables and floor of the main conference room, nearly at the top of the 40-foot ceiling, Raz's breath was caught in his throat as he laid eyes on the attackers. Lefty, repeat yourself. Your signal is not coming in clear, Han said, for the 4th time since the emergency comlink was detected from Lefty, who was at Farmhold awaiting Cathian's return. A moment later, Lefty's voice rang clear for but a moment before the signal was lost. Farmhold is under attack by Antonai forces. They are everywhere. Generals, close the gate. Close it now. And with that, the signal cut out, with readings indicating that the inner gate, which linked Farmhold directly to Nomad's Forge, was now closed from Farmhold's end. Han and the rest of the command staff were stunned in silence for a few moments before Han began to snap off orders. Damn it! How the hell are they in Tanai on the homeworld? Maz, you and the rest of the crew hold things down here. Kana and I are going to assist. Before anyone could raise an objection, Han was already on his way to collect Kanar and heading for the gate on Nomad's Forge. While Farmhold's gate was a minor one, only able to link directly to Nomad's Forge, the one on the Forge was far more capable, and Han was going to use it to drop them directly in front of Cathian's house, which was attached to the main command center for Farmhold. Hold on, Cathian, help is on the way, Han whispered to no one in particular as he sprinted across the station to the gate. IttR gate system successfully shut down. Chandler spoke calmly, despite the chaos evident on the many monitors and scrying orbs in Farmhold's security command center. Moving with robotic speed and efficiency, he issued troops to both his fellow Celestians and to the other forces he could contact, as well as managing the various automated defense systems within Farmhold. Good, Lefty said as he scanned the orbs and screens. What's the current status? Where is our foe at their strongest? He had set down the tube he had arrived with, and was running his hands across the many pistols that he had festooned across him in bandoliers and holsters. Still scattered, Chanlos began. However, turret systems have forced Antonai to abandon the main roads and all open areas. It would appear they are beginning to consolidate into the forests that have yet to be developed. Chanlos highlighted the areas of the map of Farmhold in each sector, in which the attackers were beginning to pull back to. 12.75% of our towers have been damaged critically or destroyed. Combined with the cover these woods will provide, it is likely we will have to clear them out directly. Highest concentration appears to be forming in South Quarter, innermost ring area. That's a residential area. What about the tunnels? Are they compromised? Negative. They are still under construction, with only the Celestian Nodi Command or other command-level personnel having access. Further security measures would have been activated as soon as the alarms were set off. Chanlos replied, Thank the VAs. Now, what about Cathian? Any clue as to where their transport is? Lefty was examining the detailed map of the sector in question. All communication and sensor systems are experiencing multiple and persistent forms of interference. Chanlos began as a new set of images appeared. Hold on. Overrides for emergency bypass and landing access are being received. It is Cathian's transport. Lefty sighed, breath of relief. Good, good. Now, make sure he gets that. Lefty gestured toward the cylinder. And keep him here. I'm going to see what I can do about thinning out that little gathering of Antonii. Lefty pointed at the sector being highlighted still. They're far more dangerous in groups, and we can't let them have the time to regroup and adjust their attack strategies. Chanlos nodded. I will do my best to keep Lord Cathian from leaving, but I cannot promise anything, Sir Lefty. Knock him out if need be. We cannot have him risking himself foolishly here. There are bigger things at stake. Lefty was already moving to the exit to the command chamber. I also expect that Han will be arriving shortly. He doesn't need to gate here to be active to use his own. So, until he arrives, Cathian is to stay put. He can argue with me later about it, if he should feel particularly brave. Lefty finished as the door began to close behind him. Understood, was all that Chanlos could say before the door closed. V's favor be with you. Razalon was less than pleased. One might even say he was angry. 30 seconds had passed since the beginning of his counterattack on the Antonii invaders in the main conference room, and they were all still alive and effectively pressing their own attacks against him. Not that he hadn't killed any of them. In fact, by his reckoning, he'd slain each of the 24 of them at least twice, if not thrice. Their ability to resurrect each other so instantly was not one known to Raz, and his frustration at not being able to effectively slay these invaders without large-scale destruction of the station was beginning to grow rapidly. Another 30 seconds later, and the situation was much the same, and Razalon was now weaving and dodging, using his Mega Blade massive form to deflect and block the torrents of incoming powers and attacks issued forth by the Antonii, and taking the brief respite to think. They were at a deadlock. Raz couldn't kill them fast enough to prevent the resurrections, and they couldn't overwhelm his defenses in any meaningful way. Yet. Both parties were fighting in such a way as to contain the damage of the battle, and while Raz's reasons were fairly obvious, it was his station after all, the Antonii's motivation in preserving the station would only make sense if... Thunk! Glancing up, and while in a diving motion across the heads of the foe, Raz saw a small device attached to the dome of see-through material that allowed light into the room. On the device, he recognized a familiar company logo and smiled in the first time in over a minute. Soon, he was being pressed and overwhelmed by the Antonii, slowly being driven back into a corner, yet making his valiant resistance effective enough to force all of the Antonii to work together, hurling power and energy in a final push to destroy this foolish Analar that thought they could stop them. As his back foot finally slid into the corner itself, another 30 seconds had passed in the meantime, and with it, beep. It was just loud enough for those nearest to hear, but even as they looked up, a 30-foot section of the hull surrounding the glass dome simply vanished, deleted from existence by a specialized void-breaching device. Before the air inside and outside could begin to move, destabilize, or equalize, a dozen rays and beams of arcane and celestial master blending fell into the Antonii and entirely brought their ruination as each struck was destroyed beyond ash and dust. 30 seconds later, and all the enemies in the conference room were slain, and Raz, along with Varia, Skywind, Amasai, were waiting for an update from the bridge on the current situation of the station. After a long moment, the bridge responded that the engineering section and the main power plant were under attack, with no friendly signals detected in the section. With only a slight frown of worry, Raz reached his hand out to Varia so that he could carry her along past the rooms protecting that part of the station. Just as she reached out, the entirety of the station began to shake in a mechanical, measured, and practiced manner. Snatching her hand while explaining that the station was contracting into its full defensive configuration, and that they needed to hurry before the Peacemaker became nearly unassailable for any other supporting forces that might try to help. Shifting themselves into the main chamber of the engineering section, and furiously clearing the area of Antani with brutal and ruthless efficiency, Raz and Varia found themselves looking at the main power plant core with great worry. It was ramping up in an unstable overload sequence, one that not even Varia with her expertise could stabilize in time, and one that could likely take a chunk out of the planet if it was allowed to detonate. Varia looked over at Raz just in time to see his hand flick at the wrist with a softly spoken apology, and before she could think to raise an argument, she was floating above the now locked down station. Reflexively concealing herself in a spell before the weapons of the station could be targeted on her, she noticed a small item in her offhand. Opening her hand and looking at it, she felt the detonation of the power core and looked straight up to see a burst of energy bright enough to be the sun for but a moment, with a streaking red line moving from it in their direction. The fool! Raz had taken the whole thing to orbit, and trusted on his suit and his grace to see him through the act of insanity. And as Varia looked on, calculating whatever was left of Raz would hit, she saw that while the station had obviously just lost its main power core, secondary systems were coming online, with its shields and weapons still active. However, its ability to move was now in question, as it was seeming to strain against the pull of Jam'mMar's surface and gravity, with dips and tips of the station as if it were a ship on the seas. However, when the streaking energetic form of Razalan impacted upon the station's shields, and then bounced off of them into an awaiting magical telekinetic net of Varia's creation, the interplay of momentum, grace, and forces far more esoteric from Raz's descent were enough to force the station to the ground and keep it there with the impact upon the surface. Varia moved quickly, forcing the magical seed of healing that was in her hand into Raz's still charring mouth, practically working his jaw and throat muscles for him. The effect was only moments in taking root, as flesh, bone, as well as his arms and armor were flush with the luminous power and soon restored in full. Rassilon was whole in body and mind once more, but reported that his connection with his grace was weakened or disturbed. As he slowly stood on the platform of arcane power Varia had willed into existence, Raz remarked that even if it was now immobile, the Peacemaker station would take a significant amount of force to breach, and even more to destroy. With a wicked smile, Varia reminded Raz that they had such forces available, so long as Farmhold hadn't fallen. Raz matched the mischievous grin with one of his own as he prepared to try to contact Cathian for fire support. Just as this was happening, however, across the entire visible length of the border of Deep Lock's lands, pillars burst forth from the ground at regular intervals, with films of magical force stretching, linking, and connecting them, sealing Deep Lock's land and the crest station behind walls of immense force as Raz and Varia looked on confused. As the transport landed and the multiple exits opened, Elisee burst forth, her feet never touching the ground. It was as if a cushion of rubber-like force propelled her forward each step. As she dashed off towards the south, Cathian, his brothers along with Solniak made their way to the command center in no less of a rush, even if their feet did touch the ground with heavy, long-strided steps. As they passed Lefty on his way towards the south himself, the legend of heroes spun and turned to keep up with them, only stopping as they entered a large room in the center of the complex. Lefty spoke in hushed tones to Solniak while holding the cylinder he had picked back up as they passed Canlos in the security command room, gesturing intently to Cathian while shaking the cylinder. Meanwhile, Cathian, Justique, and Lawson each took a seat on the edge of the scale map of Farmhold in the center of the room, each chair equally distant from each other. As they did so, with licks of flame and powers erratic, the map became a scale model of the Farmhold area, with all the details of the battles going on and a level of command and control now possible only with the available might of their leaders, the power of their blue frames, and the system they created to take advantage of it all. However, before any sweeping rearrangements of their forces could be ordered, a priority comm signal from Deep Block was detected, as the interference from the antennae had been overcome with the addition of Cathian and his brother's power. A moment later, the face of the Lord of Deep Block came into focus and spoke.
It would appear that I have been played, and you have been played by proxy.
His aged face turned hard, his eyes full of hate.
I am no one's pawn, so, to our mutual manipulator.
He held up a small rod-like device and flipped the end up, revealing a glowing button just under his thumb.
I defy you, and furthermore, I place Deep Block under Farmhold's authority for all matters of territorial security. Sorry, kid. I should have seen this for what it was. Just to spite the bastards that set this all up, here's a tip. You've got a Deep's assault coming for you from the eastern ore woods. It was supposed to be our surprise against you. I figure you'll handle it just fine, and I guess they'll be set on you as soon as they can get the orders to them. Anyway, kid, goodbye. For the rounds, and honor.
He pressed the button, and the signal was lost. A great shaking of the ground was felt across Farmhold, felt across the continent of Solaris, felt across all the land masses of the planet of Jam'mR, as well as every other planet in the Credelis cluster, regardless of status or affiliation. In the last defiant moments and spiteful, yet completely predictable actions of a betrayed cat's paw, the Metatomic Calamity has begun. To be continued. If you'd like to contribute to the further exploration and explanation of the realms, please consider leaving a comment, a like, and sharing the video around. I read all the comments and make efforts to reply to each. Thank you for helping to grow the channel, and know I look forward to each and every one of your comments. Other methods of support can be found in the channel's description. Thank you for watching.